Some images should never exist. Some shadows should never take form. Some whispers should never be heard. Michael Bennett discovered this truth at 3:27 in the morning, alone in the radiology department of Mercy General Hospital, when he heard a voice coming from an empty X-ray room. A voice that whispered a name he had not spoken in 15 years. A voice that belonged to someone who had been dead for exactly that long. And when he looked at the monitor, at the image that should have shown only bones and tissue, he saw something that made his blood freeze. Something that should not be possible. Something that proved the dead do not always stay buried. Michael had been an X-ray technician for 18 years. He had seen thousands of images, broken bones, tumors, foreign objects lodged in places they should never be. He had developed a clinical detachment, a professional distance that allowed him to see the human body as a collection of systems and structures rather than a person with dreams and fears. It was easier that way, safer, less painful. But tonight, that distance would collapse. Tonight, he would be forced to confront something he had spent 15 years trying to forget. The night shift at Mercy General was always quiet. Most of the staff had gone home. The hallways were dimmed. The only sounds were the distant beeping of monitors and the occasional footsteps of nurses making their rounds. Michael preferred it this way. The silence, the solitude, the absence of questions he did not want to answer. He was preparing to close down for the night when the order came through. Emergency X-ray. Room 3. Patient name, Jane Doe. Unidentified woman found unconscious on the street. Possible head trauma. Possible internal injuries. Needed imaging immediately. Michael gathered his equipment, walked down the corridor to room 3. The fluorescent lights flickered as he approached, casting strange shadows on the walls. He had worked in this hospital long enough to know that old buildings made strange noises, that electrical systems failed, that there was always a rational explanation for things that seemed unexplainable. But something about tonight felt different. The air was heavier, colder, as if the building itself was holding its breath. He opened the door to room 3. The patient was already positioned on the table. A woman in her mid-40s, pale, unconscious. Her clothes were torn and dirty, as if she had been lying on the street for hours. There was dried blood on her forehead. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Michael approached the table, checked the positioning, adjusted the machine. Standard procedure, nothing unusual. Nothing that should have triggered the sense of dread that was building in his chest. But then he heard it. A whisper. Soft. Barely audible. Coming from somewhere in the room. He froze. Looked around. The room was empty. Just him and the unconscious patient. No one else. No hidden speakers. No open vents. Just silence and shadows. He convinced himself he had imagined it. Exhaustion playing tricks on his mind. He had been working double shifts all week. His brain was tired. That was all. He positioned himself behind the protective barrier, pressed the button. The machine hummed. The X-ray was taken. He waited for the image to appear on the monitor. And when it did, his heart stopped. The woman's ribs were clearly visible. Her spine, her skull. Everything was normal. Everything was as it should be. Except for one thing. There, in the center of her chest cavity, where her heart should be, was something else. Not an organ, not a tumor, not a medical abnormality, but words, letters, formed by shadows and light in a way that defied every law of physics and biology. Words that should not exist in an X-ray image. Words that could not exist. But there they were. Clear. Undeniable. Impossible. Michael, you failed her. Now she has come back. Michael stumbled backward. His hands were shaking. His breath came in short, ragged gasps. This was not possible. X-rays did not show words. They showed density, bone, tissue, metal, not language, not messages, not accusations written in the architecture of the human body. He looked at the monitor again, hoping he had misread it, hoping his tired mind had created a pattern where none existed. But the words remained. Stark, clear, undeniable. He ran to the patient, looked at her face, really looked. And that is when recognition hit him like a physical blow. The shape of her nose, the curve of her jaw, the scar above her left eyebrow. He knew this face. He had seen it every day for 3 years. Had kissed it. Had held it. Had promised it forever. This was not Jane Doe. This was not an unidentified woman found unconscious on the street. This was Sarah Mitchell, his fiancée, the woman he was supposed to marry 15 years ago, the woman who had died the night before their wedding. But that was impossible. Sarah was dead. He had been to her funeral, had watched them lower her casket into the ground, had spent 15 years carrying the weight of her absence. She could not be here, could not be lying on this table, could not be whispering accusations through X-ray images. The dead did not return. The dead did not accuse. The dead stayed dead, unless they did not. Unless the things we bury find a way to claw back to the surface. Unless guilt has a gravity strong enough to pull the past into the present. Unless Michael Bennett was about to learn that some debts cannot be escaped, some secrets cannot be kept, and some ghosts refuse to stay silent. He heard the whisper again, louder this time. Close enough that he could feel breath on the back of his neck. He spun around. No one was there, but the voice continued. Sarah voice. The voice he had not heard in 15 years, but would recognize anywhere. You knew, Michael. You knew and you said nothing. You let me die. You let me walk into that night. And now I am here to show you what happens to people who choose silence over truth. Michael fell to his knees. Tears streamed down his face. Because she was right. He had known. Had seen the warning signs. Had noticed the symptoms. And he had said nothing. Had convinced himself it was nothing. Had chosen ignorance over action. And Sarah had paid the price. Now, before we go any further, I need you to understand something. Guilt is not just an emotion. It is a living thing. It grows. It feeds. It waits. And when the time is right, it comes for you. Michael Bennett was about to discover that the worst hauntings are not the ones that come from outside. They are the ones we create ourselves. The ones that live in the space between what we did and what we should have done. And tonight, that space was about to collapse. Mercy General Hospital had been built in 1962. It was one of those institutions that had witnessed decades of medical advancements, human suffering, miraculous recoveries, and inevitable deaths. The radiology department was located in the basement, away from the main floors where life and death decisions were made every hour. It was quiet down there, isolated, the kind of place where sound traveled strangely, where shadows seemed darker, where time moved differently than in the rest of the building. Michael had worked in this basement for nearly 2 decades. He knew every corner, every machine, every flickering light that needed replacing. He had become part of the infrastructure, as permanent and overlooked as the pipes running through the walls. Most staff members barely acknowledged him. He was the X-ray guy, the person who took pictures of broken bones and damaged organs, the person who saw inside people but never really knew them. But 15 years ago, Michael had known someone, Sarah Mitchell. They had met at a medical conference. She was a nurse. He was a technician. They connected over shared frustrations with hospital bureaucracy and a mutual love of old movies. Within 6 months, they were engaged. Within a year, they were planning a wedding. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly as it should be, except it was not. Because Sarah had been sick. Not obviously, not dramatically. But there were signs. She complained of headaches, said she felt dizzy sometimes, mentioned that her vision would blur for no reason. Michael had noticed, had seen the symptoms, had thought about suggesting she get an MRI, a CT scan, something to rule out anything serious. But he had convinced himself it was nothing. Stress from wedding planning, long shifts at the hospital, lack of sleep, normal things that normal people experienced. The night before their wedding, Sarah had collapsed. Massive brain aneurysm. She was rushed to Mercy General, to the very hospital where they both worked, where they had met, where they had planned to start their life together. She died 3 hours later, never regained consciousness, never got to wear her wedding dress, never got to say goodbye. The autopsy revealed that the aneurysm had been developing for months. The headaches, the dizziness, the blurred vision, all symptoms, all warnings, all things Michael had noticed and dismissed. If she had been diagnosed earlier, if she had received treatment, she might have survived. But she had not been diagnosed, and she had not survived. And Michael had spent 15 years knowing that he could have saved her, should have saved her, and had chosen silence instead. He had never told anyone, had buried the guilt so deep that most days he could pretend it did not exist. He threw himself into his work, became the most reliable technician at Mercy General, never missed a shift, never made a mistake, never let another patient go undiagnosed. But the guilt remained, a constant weight pressing down on his chest, a voice in the back of his mind that whispered the same accusation every single night. You killed her. You saw the signs and you did nothing. You let her die. And now, 15 years later, Sarah was lying on the X-ray table in room 3. Unconscious. Unidentified. Impossible. And the X-ray image showed words that could not exist. Words that accused him. Words that knew his secret. Michael stood frozen in the room. His hands were shaking. His breathing was shallow. He looked at Sarah's face again. Older now. Lines around her eyes that had not been there 15 years ago. But it was her. He would recognize her anywhere. The question was not whether this was Sarah. The question was how. How could a dead woman be lying in front of him? How could her heart, or whatever occupied the space where her heart should be, form words on an X-ray? How could the impossible be happening in a basement room of a hospital that prided itself on science and rationality? He heard footsteps in the corridor. Someone was coming. He needed to compose himself, needed to act normal, needed to pretend that the world had not just collapsed around him. He stepped away from the table, wiped his eyes, took a deep breath. The door opened. It was Dr. Helen Ross, the on-call physician. She looked tired, as most doctors did at 3 a.m. She glanced at the patient, then at Michael. Any idea who she is? Dr. Ross asked. No identification, no wallet, nothing. Just found her lying in an alley downtown. Looks like she has been there for a while. Michael tried to speak. His voice came out as a hoarse whisper. No identification at all? Dr. Ross shook her head. Nothing. We are running her fingerprints through the system, but it will take time. In the meantime, we need to figure out what is wrong with her. Did you get the X-rays? Michael nodded, pointed to the monitor. His hand was shaking so badly he had to grip the edge of the desk to steady it. Dr. Ross walked over, looked at the screen, studied the image. And then she frowned. This is strange, she said. There is something here, in the chest cavity. It almost looks like. She leaned closer, squinted. It almost looks like letters, like words. But that is impossible. X-rays do not show words. They show density, bone, tissue, not language. Michael said nothing. He could not speak, could not move, could not think. Because if Dr. Ross could see the words too, then this was not a hallucination. This was not exhaustion playing tricks on his mind. This was real. This was happening, and he had no idea how to explain it. Dr. Ross turned to him. Are you okay, Michael? You look pale. Maybe you should sit down. Michael shook his head. Said he was fine. But he was not fine. He was falling apart. And the worst part, the part that terrified him more than anything, was that he knew this was only the beginning. Sarah had not returned from the dead to forgive him. She had returned to make him face what he had done, to force him to acknowledge the truth he had been running from for 15 years. And whatever was about to happen next would be worse than anything he could imagine. Dr. Ross left the room to consult with other specialists. She wanted a second opinion on the strange X-ray, wanted someone else to confirm what she was seeing, or perhaps to tell her she was wrong, that exhaustion was making her see patterns that did not exist. Michael was alone again with the woman who could not possibly be Sarah Mitchell, but was. He approached the table slowly. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it echoing in his ears. He stood over her, looking down at her face, searching for any sign of consciousness, any indication that this was a cruel joke, a nightmare he would wake up from. But her eyes remained closed. Her breathing remained steady. She looked peaceful, as if she was simply sleeping, as if death had never touched her. Michael reached out. His hand trembled as it moved toward her face. He needed to touch her, needed to confirm she was real, needed to know if flesh and bone truly lay beneath the illusion. His fingers were inches from her cheek when her eyes snapped open. They were not the eyes he remembered. Sarah had green eyes, bright, full of life, full of hope. These eyes were different. They were dark, empty, like staring into a void where light went to die, and they were looking directly at him, through him, into the deepest parts of him where he kept his secrets locked away. Her lips moved. No sound came out at first, just the shape of words forming in silence. Then slowly, a whisper. So quiet he had to lean closer to hear it. So quiet it felt like the words were being spoken directly into his mind rather than his ears. You saw me dying, Michael. You saw the signs. You knew something was wrong. But you said nothing. You chose convenience over concern. You chose your comfort over my life. And I died because of it. I died calling your name. I died hoping you would save me. I died believing you loved me. But love does not stay silent when someone is suffering. Love speaks up. Love acts. Love saves. You did not love me enough. Michael stumbled backward. Tears streamed down his face. His legs felt weak. His chest felt like it was being crushed. Because every word was true. Every accusation was deserved. He had seen the signs, had known something was wrong, had chosen to ignore it because acknowledging it would have been inconvenient, would have required difficult conversations, would have forced him to confront the possibility that something was seriously wrong with the woman he was about to marry. I am sorry, he whispered. His voice was broken, raw. I am so sorry, Sarah. I should have said something. I should have insisted you see a doctor. I should have been there. I have carried this guilt every day for 15 years. I have hated myself for what I did, for what I did not do. Please, please forgive me. Sarah sat up. The movement was wrong, too smooth, too controlled, as if gravity did not quite apply to her. She swung her legs off the table, stood, walked toward him. Each step echoed in the small room like a heartbeat, like a countdown, like the ticking of a clock measuring the seconds until judgment arrived. Forgiveness, she said. The word hung in the air like a curse. You want forgiveness. You want me to absolve you of your guilt. You want to be free of the weight you have carried. But why should I give you that gift? Why should I release you when I was never released? When I died in agony, confused, terrified, wondering why the man I loved was not there? Why should you get peace when I never did? Michael fell to his knees. His entire body was shaking. Sobs tore through him like physical wounds. He had no answer, no defense, no justification. He had failed her, had let her die, had spent 15 years trying to make up for it by being the perfect technician, by never missing another diagnosis, by saving everyone except the one person who had mattered most. But none of it had been enough. None of it had changed what he had done. None of it had brought her back. The room began to change. The walls seemed to shift. The air grew colder. The fluorescent lights flickered and dimmed until only a weak, sickly glow remained. Shadows crawled across the floor like living things. And in those shadows, Michael saw something that made his blood turn to ice. Images, memories, playing out on the walls like a film. He saw Sarah in their apartment, holding her head, wincing in pain. Saw himself telling her it was nothing. Saw her looking at him with trust, with belief, with the certainty that if he said she was fine, then she must be fine. Saw her smiling despite the pain because she did not want to worry him. Saw her collapsing the night before their wedding. Saw the paramedics working on her. Saw the doctors shaking their heads. Saw her lying in a hospital bed, brain dead, machines breathing for her. Saw himself standing beside her, holding her hand, realizing what he had done, what he had failed to do. And then he saw something else. Something he had not known, had never witnessed. He saw Sarah in the moments after her death. Saw her spirit, or consciousness, or whatever remained when the body stopped working, hovering in the hospital room. Saw her watching him cry. Saw her trying to reach out to him. Saw her screaming his name over and over, but no sound came out. Saw her trapped, unable to move on, unable to let go. Because the man she loved had never acknowledged his mistake, had never confessed, had never truly asked for forgiveness, had simply buried the guilt and moved on with his life. Michael understood now. This was not about punishment. This was not about revenge. This was about truth. Sarah could not rest because the truth had never been spoken. The lie of silence had kept her tethered to this world, to this hospital, to the moment of her death. And the only way to free her, the only way to free himself, was to speak the truth. All of it. Without excuses, without justification, without the protective armor of rationalization he had worn for 15 years. He looked up at Sarah, met her dark, empty eyes, and he spoke. Not the apology he had already given, but the truth he had never admitted. I knew you were sick. I knew something was seriously wrong. I saw the symptoms. I recognized them from my training. And I said nothing because I was afraid. Afraid that if you were sick, our wedding would be postponed. Afraid that your illness would become my responsibility. Afraid that loving you would require sacrifice. And I chose my fear over your life. I let you die because I was a coward. Because I valued my comfort more than your survival. And I have spent 15 years pretending I did not know. Pretending it was a tragedy I could not have prevented. But I could have prevented it. I should have prevented it. And I did not. That is the truth. That is what I have been hiding. Not just from others, but from myself. The words hung in the air. Heavy. Final. Undeniable. And as Michael spoke them, something changed. The shadows on the walls began to recede. The cold air began to warm. And Sarah's face, which had been empty and void, began to show emotion. Not anger, not hatred, but something else. Something that looked almost like relief. Sarah reached out her hand, touched Michael's face. Her fingers were warm now. Not cold, not the touch of death, but the touch of something living, something real. And when she spoke, her voice was different. Softer, more human. Less like judgment and more like understanding. Thank you for finally telling the truth, she said. But Michael, there is something you need to know. Something I could not tell you until you were ready to hear it. Michael looked up at her through his tears. His mind was fractured. His reality had been shattered and rebuilt so many times in the last hour that he no longer knew what was real and what was not. What could she possibly tell him that would make any of this make sense? Sarah took a step back, and then, slowly, her form began to shimmer, to shift. Like a mirage dissolving in the heat, her features blurred, her body transformed. And standing before him was no longer Sarah Mitchell. Standing before him was someone else entirely. A young man in his early 20s, dark hair, kind eyes, wearing the uniform of a hospital orderly. Michael stared in shock and confusion. Who are you? Where is Sarah? What is happening? The young man smiled sadly. My name is Daniel Reeves. I work here at Mercy General. Or rather, I used to. I died 2 weeks ago. Heart condition I did not know I had. Collapsed in the parking lot. By the time someone found me, it was too late. Michael shook his head. This made no sense. None of this made any sense. If you are Daniel Reeves, then who was the woman on the table? Who was Sarah? There was no woman on the table, Michael. There was never a Jane Doe. There was never an emergency x-ray order. There was never a patient. Daniel gestured to the x-ray table. Look. Michael turned. The table was empty. No body. No Sarah. No unconscious woman. Just an empty table under harsh fluorescent lights. His mind reeled. But I saw her. I touched her. Dr. Ross saw the x-ray. She saw the words. Daniel shook his head gently. Dr. Ross was never here, Michael. You have been alone in this room for the last hour, talking to yourself, reliving your guilt, confronting your demons. Everything you experienced was a manifestation. A construct created by your subconscious mind to force you to face what you have been running from for 15 years. Michael felt like the floor was disappearing beneath him. So none of it was real? Sarah did not come back? This is all just in my head? Daniel stepped closer. The guilt is real. Sarah's death is real. What you did, and what you failed to do, is real. But Sarah did not return from the dead to punish you. She has been gone for 15 years. She is at peace. She always has been. The only person who has not found peace is you. The only person still trapped in that moment is you. And your mind created this elaborate scenario to force you to finally admit the truth. Michael covered his face with his hands, tried to make sense of what he was hearing. If this is all in my head, then why are you here? Why are you Daniel Reeves? Why not someone else? Because I am your mirror, Michael. Daniel said quietly. I am what happens when we do not speak up, when we do not get help, when we ignore the signs our bodies give us. I died because I did not know I had a heart condition. I never got checked, never asked for help, never told anyone I was feeling strange. And I died alone in a parking lot. Just like Sarah died alone because you did not speak up. I am here to show you that silence kills. That fear of inconvenience, fear of being wrong, fear of overreacting, all of those fears are nothing compared to the reality of preventable death. Michael looked at the monitor. The X-ray image was still there, but the words had changed. They no longer read, Michael, you failed her. Now she has come back. Now they read something else entirely. Speak before silence becomes permanent. Save the living while you still can. Daniel's voice softened. You have been carrying Sarah's death for 15 years, using it as penance, as punishment. But that is not what she would have wanted. Sarah loved you. Even in her final moments, even when you were not there, she loved you. And love does not trap people in guilt. Love releases them. Love asks them to learn, to grow, to become better, to make sure what happened to her never happens to anyone else. Michael felt something break inside him. A wall he had built around his heart 15 years ago. A wall made of guilt and shame and self-hatred. And behind that wall was not darkness, not emptiness, but grief. Pure, raw, honest grief. The grief he had never allowed himself to feel because feeling it would mean accepting that Sarah was really gone, that she was never coming back, that he had to live in a world without her. He wept, not the silent, controlled tears he had shed in private for 15 years, but the loud, ugly, consuming tears of someone finally allowing themselves to mourn, to feel, to be human again. When he finally looked up, Daniel was fading, becoming translucent, disappearing like smoke in the wind. But before he vanished completely, he spoke one last time. There is a patient in room 7, elderly man, complaining of chest pain. The doctors think it is heartburn. They are going to send him home with antacids. But you know better, Michael. You can see the signs they are missing. You can speak up this time. You can save him. That is your redemption, not carrying guilt, but using what you learned from your failure to prevent future failures. Sarah's death does not have to be meaningless. It can be the lesson that saves countless others, if you let it. And then Daniel was gone. Michael was alone in room 3. The X-ray table was empty. The monitor showed nothing but static. The door opened. Dr. Ross walked in, looking exhausted but very much real this time. Hey, Michael. Sorry to bother you again, but we have another patient who needs imaging. Room 7. Elderly gentleman. Probably nothing serious, but we want to rule out anything cardiac. Can you handle it? Michael stood, wiped his eyes, took a deep breath, and for the first time in 15 years, he felt something other than guilt. He felt purpose. Actually, Dr. Ross, before I do the X-ray, I think you should run a full cardiac panel on him. Check his troponin levels. Do an EKG. Something about chest pain in elderly patients at this hour triggers my concern. Better safe than sorry. Dr. Ross looked surprised, then nodded. You know what? You are right. Let me order those tests. Thank you, Michael. As she left, Michael looked back at the empty X-ray table, whispered 2 words into the silence. Thank you. The elderly man in room 7 was named Robert Lawson, 73 years old, retired accountant, widower. He had come to the emergency room complaining of what he thought was bad indigestion. Had eaten something that disagreed with him, he said. Just needed some medication, and he would be fine. The initial examination supported his theory. The doctors were preparing to discharge him with a prescription for antacids when Michael's suggestion changed everything. The cardiac panel revealed elevated troponin levels. The EKG showed irregularities. Within 20 minutes, Robert Lawson was in surgery, having an emergency stent placed in a blocked artery. The cardiologist told him later that if he had gone home, if those tests had not been ordered, he would have had a massive heart attack within hours, likely fatal. But because someone had spoken up, because someone had trusted their instincts, because someone had insisted on looking deeper, Robert Lawson would live to see his grandchildren grow up. Michael visited him in recovery the next day. Robert thanked him, called him a hero. But Michael shook his head, said he was not a hero, said he was just someone who had learned a very hard lesson about the cost of silence. Robert did not understand what he meant, and Michael did not explain. Some lessons are too personal, too painful, to share with strangers. But Michael carried that lesson with him from that day forward. He became known throughout Mercy General as the technician who always asked questions, who always pushed for additional tests when something felt wrong, who never dismissed a symptom as insignificant. Some doctors found him annoying. Some nurses thought he was overstepping his role, but patients lived because of him. Diagnoses were made earlier. Treatments were started sooner. Lives were saved. And every time Michael saved someone, every time his vigilance prevented a tragedy, he thought of Sarah, thanked her, honored her memory not with guilt, but with action, with presence, with the courage to speak up even when it was uncomfortable, especially when it was uncomfortable. He never saw Daniel Reeves again, never experienced another supernatural encounter, never found mysterious words on X-ray images. But he did not need to. The message had been delivered. The lesson had been learned. And Michael had finally understood that the dead do not need to haunt us to teach us. We haunt ourselves with the weight of unspoken truths, unacknowledged failures, and the stories we tell ourselves to avoid confronting what we have done. Years later, Michael was asked to speak at a medical conference about diagnostic vigilance. He stood at the podium, looking out at hundreds of healthcare professionals, and he told them a story. Not the supernatural parts, not the impossible X-ray or the manifestation of his guilt, but the human parts. He told them about Sarah, about the symptoms he ignored, about the woman he loved and lost because he chose comfort over concern, about the 15 years he spent drowning in guilt until he finally learned that the only way to honor the dead is to protect the living. There was silence in the room when he finished. Then someone started clapping, then another, then everyone. Not because his story was inspiring, but because it was honest. Because every person in that room had made a similar choice at some point in their career, had dismissed a symptom, had overlooked a sign, had convinced themselves that something was probably nothing. And Michael's honesty gave them permission to acknowledge their own failures, to learn from them, to do better. After the conference, a young nurse approached him. She was crying. She told him about her father, about chest pains he had been having, about how he kept saying he was fine, about how she had been meaning to insist he see a doctor but had not found the time. Michael looked at her and said only 3 words. "Do it today." She did. Her father had a 90% blockage in his main coronary artery. Emergency surgery saved his life. She sent Michael a letter months later, thanking him, telling him that his story had given her the courage to speak up, to push past her father's stubbornness, to insist on tests he did not think he needed. And because of that, her father would walk her down the aisle at her wedding, would meet his future grandchildren, would live. That is the thing about fear, about guilt, about the ghosts we carry. They are not our enemies. They are our teachers. They show us where we have failed so we can learn how to succeed. They remind us of what we have lost so we can protect what remains. They haunt us not to destroy us but to transform us, if we let them. If we listen. If we have the courage to face them instead of running away. Michael Bennett never forgot Sarah Mitchell. Never stopped missing her. Never stopped wishing he could go back and make a different choice. But he also never stopped using what her death taught him. Never stopped speaking up. Never stopped insisting that symptoms matter, that intuition matters, that the discomfort of asking questions is nothing compared to the tragedy of staying silent. And in the quiet moments, late at night when the hospital was dark and empty, when he walked through the basement corridors of the radiology department, he sometimes felt her presence, not as a ghost, not as an accusation, but as a reminder, a gentle whisper in the back of his mind that said what Daniel Reeves had said all those years ago. Speak before silence becomes permanent. Save the living while you still can. So I want you to think about something. Right now, in this moment. Is there someone in your life who has been showing signs of something wrong? Is there a symptom you have been dismissing? Is there a conversation you have been avoiding because it would be uncomfortable? Because it might be nothing? Because you do not want to overreact? Do not wait. Do not convince yourself it can wait until tomorrow. Do not choose comfort over concern. Speak up, ask questions, insist on answers. Because silence is not neutral. Silence is a choice. And sometimes silence kills. Leave a comment below. Tell me about a time when you spoke up and it made a difference. Or tell me about a time when you stayed silent and regretted it. Your story might be the thing that gives someone else the courage to act. Your honesty might save a life. That is the real miracle. Not the supernatural, not the impossible, but the human choice to care enough to speak, to act, to save. In the end, perhaps the real miracle was fear.